Hello, party people. My name is Krista Keough, and you're listening to Granted, the podcast that puts the fun in funding. Today we are in the studio with the very talented John Mullane. John is the lead singer and songwriter of the multiple award-winning indie rock band In Flight Safety. For the past few years, John has been shifting his focus to recording in his studio and spends all his time now producing and co-writing with other artists, helping them find their own creative point of view. John is also the co-producer for Granted, and I'm so pleased to say our very first guest. Okay,
Yeah,
that's great.
We're started. I think we're rolling.
We are.
Wouldn't
rolling.
it be terrible if I wasn't rolling?
And we did the whole thing.
I am sure it's happened before. I'm positive that's happened. Yeah, but
That
Yeah.
would be sad. That would be tragic. We're
Yeah.
pros now.
yeah,
we did.
old
we
pros. We
doing it
got
all
3
morning.
hours in.
Yeah. So thank you for agreeing to talk a little bit about grants and your band.
My pleasure.
What I kind of want to start with, I think, is when, you first started In Flight Safety. And what I'm interested to know is what brought you and your bandmates together.
In terms of like how we met each other, or like in
Yeah,
terms
and
of
like
music?
your
Yeah.
idea of starting the band. Like, why did you want to do that?
That's a great question. People often don't ask that because I don't know. People don't go that deep, I guess. Usually, I think the main thing that started the band was my specific desire to create music that I felt was missing from my community or the scene I was in. And I had a point of view about music that was a little different back in 2003 and 4 when we started, especially being in Moncton. It's a very, very like heavy metal, punk rock, hardcore kind of town. So being interested in like the softer sounds and, sensitive melodies
Yeah.
and harmonies and lush was just not, it wasn't, there was actually, to be fair, there was zero precedent for what I was doing in my part of the world. Precedents all over the world, like England, Europe, Iceland, of course, Sigur Rós, or even in places like Scandinavia. There's lots of precedents for the kind of music we were making. So all that to say, I was just looking for people who could share that vision of like, you love these records? Well, let's hang out together and let's be part of this thing. We could start working on this kind of stuff together. And it took forever to find people who shared the love of that music. So in the beginning, it became as kind of like a record club. Like we just listened to records that we all liked together, and that started forming and we jammed and played music, but it was like listening to music together of like, hey, did you hear this record? Because the internet was new enough that you couldn't get everything.
Right.
So that's how it started, like finding a point of view musically with other people who shared it. And I found those people. It took a long time, but I did.
Mm-hmm. So because is it right that you were born and raised in Moncton? And then when did you move to Halifax?
Yeah. I mean, it's weird. This is a weird little quirk, but I was born in Halifax because my mom had me and my sister here for whatever reason. My dad's from Halifax, and she had a obstetrician. Is that a word? Obstetrician? I think so.
Okay, yeah.
Is that a
Like
doctor?
the medical doctor. Yeah.
I said it and it just sounded like a bunch of syllables. Yeah.
Obstetrician?
I think that's the kind of doctor that delivers babies, but we'll check that later.
Okay.
And she had one here that she was comfortable with because we had some complications in her early part of her life with pregnancy. So she was here for me and my sister being born.
Wow.
And then, and my half of my family is from this part of the world. So I was raised in Moncton, though, and I lived there forever. Then moved to Halifax after I couldn't find people that shared my vision musically. I tried everything, and I ended up going back to Sackville, where the university was, even after I'd graduated, and I met people who were younger than me who were into what I was doing. That's where the band started, in Sackville. And then shortly after Sackville, they were still in school, and we had to, once they graduated, I kind of bided my time in Sackville, making music with these guys who were still all in school. And then we went to Halifax to join a music scene we felt had a lot to offer.
Wow, that's so exciting. So the music scene brought you from Moncton to Halifax. Like you came here with intentions to be in a band and to be part of this music community.
Yeah, and
That's
it really,
wild.
and just to be like specific, it was from Sackville, because I was living in Sackville and making the records that the first record we ever made was in Sackville.
Oh, sorry, Sackville, New Brunswick.
Yeah. Sorry, where Mount A is, and I was living in a house there with really cheap rents, and I worked a day job, and I could pay. The rent was like there was 3 or 4 of us living there, and I remember being like $275 a month for a whole house. So we just shared that 4 ways, I think. Mm-hmm. So it was nothing, and and the heat was included, and I could just work, make music, pay those rents pretty easily, and then continue making music. And then after the band germinated a bit more there, we ended up moving to Halifax because we're like, we can't live in Sackville forever, and if we want to take this up a level, we need a community that's more than just 2 other bands.
That's incredible. You know, keeping your living expenses low, I think, is key, because I know for myself, when I was first starting out, I had the same scenario where I lived in a house with a bunch of girls and we all split the rent. And so, it was like $385, I think, including like heat and everything. Yeah. So you're right. There's so much freedom if you can set up your life that way, which is great. So when do you remember really feeling like In Flight had got some momentum, like outside of Sackville, outside of Halifax? When did you feel that happening?
Man, we're going back a bit down memory lane here. So I think sometime around outside of Halifax, early in our career, right away, we had so many amazing things happen. So it kind of started happening the moment we finished making that EP, which was called Vacationland. It was kind of like the culmination of like 2 years of making music and trial and error. And we came up with 5 songs. And even like after it had been out a year, one of those songs didn't really fit and ended up getting booted off for another one. So that's how far down the rabbit hole of like finding this aesthetic was. Once we found that, we had opportunities came our way from our songs. And I think the work that we put into our songs really give us a leg up, and we had people help us right away. So people like M. Greiner were like, hey, I'm going to talk to my friend Yvonne, who's still a good friend of mine who used to run North by Northeast back in the day. And Yvonne was like, sure, come play in Toronto for this festival. And we got on the festival without applying or anything. And so we had these opportunities. So we went to Toronto in 2003, I think, right in the summer of that year. It was the first time we'd ever been.
Nice.
And because we had a bit of a word of mouth from friends of friends, and right away we were in Toronto. The biggest show of my life was that first show in Toronto. And all of a sudden I was playing, and people I got a card from Alan Reed, who worked at Universal back then. He's in charge of the Junos now. And Alan's like, I like this a lot. Let's keep in touch. And I was like, this is what you dream about as a kid, but it happened so fast for us. But we actually it happened so quick, and then we had to play catch up. Like, hey, we're not ready for this. We don't have enough songs but we played the game as best we could. And so right away, even when we were in Sackville, we were in Toronto within that year. And then, and we moved to Halifax in 2004.
So when you think about, when was the first time you heard about funding, getting money for music?
I heard about funding because I was part of Musique New Brunswick. When I was still in Sackville, I started volunteering with that organization a bit, helping out with as I do some tech stuff. And so helping with that, and just because I was trying to meet people and be part of whatever I could. And eventually I became, because it was such a young organization, I became part of the board, I think, of Musique New Brunswick as like a person.
Oh my God. Wow. Like a board member.
Yes.
Oh, good for you.
But really, there was only, the people that were there were the only people interested. Like, it wasn't like the way it is here today in Music Nova Scotia. And like in New Brunswick is a lot further along now. But then it was very young. And so I was part of the board, and there was an ED and executive director, and I answered to them, and I helped out with like the tech side of things, like helped get their website organized and organize some digital files and stuff that I knew how to do. And that was it. And so as part of that, I met lots of people. But what I found out from that was that one of the people from the government would join the board, and she was in charge of arts funding, and she's like, you need to apply for this money because no one's applying for it. So I had this kind of like early days direct line to funding, which was like this woman worked for New Brunswick government, and she would be telling you, apply, no one's getting this money. And so I applied the next day, and every quarter we would do an application for touring, because then I'd try to keep us busy with touring. And I'm sure that every quarter that year, there would be up to $7,500 that you could get for a young band, it's not common anymore. But we would get like, I think 2 or 3 times a year, we get $7,500 or close to.
Wow, that's excellent.
It wasn't for recording, but it was for travel, tour. And we could route our tours in that way. And then they offered a lot. They let a lot of donated services be part of it. And we got a lot of money that way.
That's awesome.
And that's how I kept it going. And I quit my job, and that really helps me kind of capitalize the band, to be honest. It was that New Brunswick money. Well, and we even tried to apply for it even when I still had an address but then eventually that fizzled out. It didn't really meet the requirements anymore when we lived in Halifax, but that money was everything.
Wow, that's incredible. So do you think you could say that your band might not have at least started the same way had it not been for that investment from music?
100%. I think had we not had that money, we would have had to find it privately. So like a major label or an investor or people's parents.
Yeah.
And in a lot of cases, our parents had to help us if we were short on rent. When we weren't touring or something, there'd be a month between something. I'd have to be like, swallow my pride and be like, I need help. Like, I have no money.
Yeah.
And that happened a couple times in my career. So yeah, I think that money is so important to get you started. You know?
I think that's so interesting, too, that you say that at that time not a lot of people were applying, because I agree with you. I even started later in like 2007, and I remember having a conversation about the mentorship program that Musique Nova Scotia offers here, which was in with the community's culture and heritage department. So it was not with Musique Nova Scotia. And the person who administered that said, you know, you can just make up your own curriculum basically and do whatever you like for this mentorship. And you should really apply because hardly anyone does this.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now it's really popular and people compete for it. So I wonder, I mean, do you think we need more now? Is that a sign that we need more because these programs are oversubscribed and, you know, it's obviously there's a need for it. Like, we just have more people applying.
Yeah, it's a great question. And there's so many factors at play in my head when I'm thinking about my own point of view on this. Like, I think we need more money because you have the top tier artists getting most of the money. Now, the way that funding is designed, it's metrics based. Like, how well are you doing? Well, we don't want to give you money if you're not doing well, which I think is, to be honest, I think is a fallacy. I think it's a bad idea because if you're not funding young artists to get started, what you're doing is you're creating in a way, it's kind of like, it's what happens in capitalism is you get the top people, there's the top people making the most money and they will continue to get bigger. The rich get richer and the young bands don't get a crack at starting out their band or realizing their vision because there is no money. And you can get some artist development money, but it's definitely lower. And also, I have been on juries for artist development, and the level of people applying is high. It's not like, oh, I've never heard of this person. Right. And also, people expect a certain professionality. I don't know if that's a word. Professionalism is probably a word. We'll go with professionalism from the artists applying. So all of a sudden, it's creating this kind of like you have to have a business right away. And I think that is, in some ways, not great because it doesn't offer that help to people who are just trying to be creative to get that product, which is music. This is all about music. It's not about a marketing plan at the end of the day. It's about, can you write that song or create that recording and then turn that into a live show that moves someone? And that's what makes you the money, right? So it is, I'm finding over time, it's becoming confusing to me if this is what it was set up for or not. And that's a longer conversation. That's what we're here to talk about. But yeah, I don't know. Today it's so competitive that like as a juror for Factor, you get an email saying we have over 1,600 applications this deadline, which is like every 3 times a year, maybe.
I think it is 3 or 4 times a year.
Okay, so you have 1,600 applications for artist development and Factor sound recording.
Yeah.
They're all pretty good too. So it's a different time. Well, people need money more than ever. Well, why is that? I mean, we could go talk about that forever. But yeah, there's not a lot of money. And with people not recorded music doesn't derive as much money as it used to. So it's even harder. So we're counting on live shows, but not everyone could be playing live shows at the same time. So it's the pie is a little smaller or maybe it's bigger, but there's more people trying to get to it.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think, last night actually I was looking at some numbers, and if you look at the most recent annual report for Radio Star Maker, you can see that, nearly, 43%, I think, of the funding goes to artists from Ontario.
Sure.
And then no money goes to PEI or New Brunswick.
And what you will see,
0%.
I think you'll see a correlation of the money that goes to the people in Ontario goes to major label artists or bigger indie labels, whether it's arts and crafts or...
and the repeat, like you said, the repeat funding, like I definitely see the value in funding a record and then funding the marketing and funding the touring, and I think that's great.
Yeah.
But you do have to ask yourself, like, are we leaving enough for the young John Mullanes of the world who are just starting out? And I think that's what the shuffle was supposed to sort of correct. So you and I worked together in 2015.
Yeah.
That was the same year that the film tax credit went kaput, and people were very nervous everywhere. And I remember when I think back to the time, I definitely felt unsure about where in-flight safety was going to fit in this new funding scheme, because the idea was Musique Nova Scotia was going to take on the emerging artists and export ready, and then Creative Industries was going to take over the exporting. And I think your record was coming up to the point where it's like, okay, you need to have a record that's, less than 2 years old, or you've got one coming up. And it's like, okay, we have to make a decision. And, do you feel like that was a confusing time for you and your band, thinking about funding and how are we going to move forward if we don't fit in or can't access this money?
Well, definitely. It was hard to find where we fit, and as an exporting artist too. And I've always felt, in particular in Nova Scotia, and let's be honest, the kind of music we make has been a little alien. It's become more common now, but for 15 years, over time, it's become a bit more common and understood. But I've always had to fight for the band. I'm like, no, listen, we're doing this much stuff. And I've always had to go and like mansplain what we're doing to the funding agencies. They're like, well, are you guys exporting? I'm like, yeah. We have this, and this, these film placements, this shows at a network TV show, and so on. I've always had to kind of sell it to people. So that's I'm used to doing that. I'm like, no, this record does really well. You don't know that it does well, and you probably don't even know it. And that's always been like a thing I've had to fight. Because I don't know, we've been a little alien in some ways with the kind of textures and things that we do. Now it seems a little weird to say that. It seems a little trite to say that. But think about this 15 years ago. Would you see a band playing a 7-minute like crescendo in like at Gus's pub? Well, we would try, but no. You would now. There's all kinds of bands, and the internet exploded that. But I've always had to explain, like, no, we're doing well, and you don't know that, and I wish you did, but here's what we're doing. And so I've always felt funding was tricky. I've always had to justify it. So even though there was a shift then, I'd still have to go into someone's office and be like, this is the kind of business we do.
Well, and do you think it's also, too, because like you said, for a long time, it just felt, especially when I was starting out in like 2007, it felt really uncool to like mainstream music. And when I was managing Rhea May, I remember one of the things she would say a lot is that she just wanted one of her songs to be on C100. And to some people, that was like the most ghastly thing you could possibly say. And I actually had a conversation with a young pop artist here in Halifax for the International Women's Day networking event. And she, I asked her what kind of music she likes. And she said, oh, I love Katy Perry. I love Taylor Swift. And I thought, oh my God, I can't believe you're saying that to me, because of course everyone listens to that music, but it's like we're afraid to admit it here in Nova Scotia in particular. It feels like the wrong thing to do if you're trying to make commercial music and be poppy or mainstream or rock. Like, it's just not in our nature, I guess. But I'm with you in that it's becoming more common.
Totally.
Like, Rhea is really the first person, I think, from the East Coast to get a song on C100 like that, and over and over.
Do it right. Yeah, exactly.
So, there was a lot of pushback for that sound in particular. If you're not the Celtic duo, then like how? But yeah, I think the diversity has been a really good thing.
I think that's totally changed now
Thank
and flipped. So now that like we have Neon Dreams and Rhea and producers like Corey LaRue and in Port Cities like Dylan is doing a lot of stuff producing wise and people like myself and people like Adam Warren from Glory Glory is producing bands.
Yes.
And we have a more pop point of view. We're not honoring necessarily as much of the past of the grungy, I hate saying slacker rock, but there's a bit of that in Halifax. There has been for years, and it's very cool, and it has its purpose too. So it's just changing, and I think it's just globalizing, like anything. Mm-hmm. That's what's going on now. We came along with kind of an alien form of music early on. I found that to be challenging, but we could show for it. We'd be like, okay, we're doing this thing in Toronto, and they want to put our record out in England and this stuff, and we have a song on Much Music, and so we needed those things.
You can't deny the fan base.
We needed them to, and I can see it so clearly. Like I needed those to so people could believe me that this was a good band. And no doubt some people didn't like the band. That's fair. But it was really tricky with like the industry side to convince them that like, just because we weren't playing heavy music or, it was like, no, people like this, maybe not here. And then it became evident that was kind of a boneheaded thing later as time went on. And we became, I think in another sense, we became useful, like as an asset to, hey, we'll take this band to South by Southwest and among other bands, and they can show the different types of sounds that come from Nova Scotia. So
that's really helpful.
It changed, just sort of flipped in the middle there. But yeah, it was tricky early on, and I had trouble with that. Yeah, and I had to continue to focus on my own point of view musically. I had to really just not let it go because I knew that was the only way forward. But we fought for it for sure.
Do you think that now that you're spending more time producing, do you think you've accomplished what you and your bandmates set out to accomplish when you started?
I'm 100% confident in saying we accomplished way more than we ever thought possible.
Yeah.
Because it was an art project. It's like, hey, we have this artistic point of view. I love these like reverby guitar sounds and these long drawn out crescendos and these, falsetto vocals fit with this idea. And we mashed a few styles together. We had this point of view that we worked on and we were like, okay, well, no one's going to like this here, but we have it. And we worked hard on it. And, so one of the challenges to my career was I was constantly like a kid going, oh my God, am I really here at the red carpet thing? And it was never my goal. So it confused me and it made it challenging to kind of keep that level of ambition high. Because I never planned to be, here, but I'm here.
Right.
And I liked it. I enjoyed it so much, being like accepted and being at award things and in some cases winning them. I loved it. It was great. It really made me feel more confident. But at the same time, it was never the goal. So,
and it's almost not always a reflection too, because I know, I believe in 2015, you guys won the award for Album of the Year.
Yeah.
At
ECMA.
St. John's, yes. Yeah. And I remember I was so happy for you, and also, it was kind of frustrating because you had the validation, but it's almost a bit late. Like it was a step late. I mean, anytime it's good to have validation, but at the same time, behind the scenes, things were uncertain. And so,
we didn't have an agent for the first part of 2014. And a lot of that's my own fault for not maintaining relationships or being quick enough on the album cycle turnarounds. A lot of that's my own fault. But yeah, that was really cool. And I mean, the work, Glenn and I always put the work first. So that meant sometimes taking a pay cut.
Right.
Like the work is not ready.
Yeah.
We can't go on tour. We need another year. We need another year, like another 10 to 12 months to finish this record. So we always put the work first. So winning an award like for the album meant everything to us in terms of like, this is the work. It's not about if we're popular, someone likes this work. And we really, really felt passionate about making that record, and that was really cool for sure.
That is really special, and
but that doesn't pay the bills.
No, exactly. I know. You can't even drink out of the Musique Nova Scotia Awards anymore.
No. And the ECMAs, there's only a little recessed part in the bottom of the pewter thing that you can drink.
It's more of a shot glass. But okay, that's awesome. And now that you are doing more work in the studio, how do you feel funding plays a role in your career now?
It plays a big role because people I work with need funding to pay me.
Okay,
in
so
some
you're
cases.
seeing that.
Yeah, definitely. And in a lot of cases, they don't get it and they find the money anyway. And I think there's a really important distinction. Like, if you want to make a record, I think you got to be prepared to pay for it yourself.
Okay.
If there's no one on, if the music is important to you and you want to work with a producer and try to get the best level of fidelity and artistic vision, I think you need to be prepared to pay for it. But funding would be nice, but we don't really fund art that much. We fund the marketing thereof. Mm-hmm. There is artistic development money out there nowadays, so that's kind of cool. But it'll be in the $1,000 to $2,000 range, so it won't get you that far towards making a record, but it could get you started.
Yeah.
And there's the juried sound recording still, but the juried sound recording, as we mentioned, has like 1,500 applicants, and
Super
the people that you are applying are already on the road and already have deals, international deals and whatnot. And so you're probably not going to get it unless you're in that top 20%, 25%.
Oh, for sure. And I
that's
think
changed,
they say,
right? So, yeah.
Yeah, like 95% of the applicants to Factor are in that general artist rating.
That's right. And I even at the level we were with the different distinctions, awards, and international tours and releases, and the wealth of film and TV and ad placements, we were still a general artist. They did not accept us as a secondary, like the second tier. Mm-hmm. So, like you said, 95% are in general. And if we can't crack the top 5 with like a career, it makes it really hard for a young band to do that. That top 5%, which being like the 2 other levels. And I used to argue with them at 2 all the time. Like, how do I get into that second level? You're not funding any of our tours. And they were like, well, if you do this, this, and this with this album. And in some cases, we did do those metrics they asked us for, but the criteria changed in that 8 months. So we didn't get it.
I was going to say it's shocking to me how it changes, because I had screen grabbed a couple notes from the Factor website, and then I looked at it a couple weeks ago, and
it's different.
It's different. Yeah, it's way fewer units, more streaming. The things that they don't tell you this is what you need, but they say the artists who are rated 2 and 3, this is what they've got going on. Mm-hmm. And so you look at it and go, okay, we need to get there.
Yes.
But that's good that you're seeing artists come in who have been funded or who are applying for funding. And do you find that makes them a little more aware that they have their plans put together a little bit better? Is there any effect there?
The ones that are applying for funding are very organized, typically.
Nice.
Yeah, I find. I don't think every artist needs to apply for funding, but most have day jobs. So they have their jobs and they have their music career. That's the complement to that. So all that being said, I wish we funded art more, or like music, and we're not so focused on funding. I think one of the problems with funding, which this is a great place to talk about it because this is what this is about, is that we fund the marketing of it too much. But when you think about that, you're trying to compete. What you're saying is, we can help you compete. It's very difficult to compete against Sony, Universal, or Warner in these ways. Like, how are you going to compete? They're always going to be able to outspend you. So $7,500 twice a year is just literally it's what peanuts, I guess we call it.
Yeah.
It's the analogy.
Yeah.
So I've always thought, what if we funded bands that gave them $15,000 or $10,000 to make a record? Mm-hmm. Well, then you could go get partners at those places. Could you not get private partnerships with major labels or medium-sized labels who have access to that Factor money? So what we're playing the game in terms of like what I would call game theory or warfare, we're playing the game in a bit of a weird way by throwing peanuts at the castle door. When in fact, should we not just be preparing our troops with the best possible music and the highest fidelity? Why don't we get everyone in to see Corey to make that pop record, or come see other producers in town who have skills that could make your music so much more solid? And then go look for partners that are in the private industry, in the private sector, rather than the government's trying to be a label in a way. And I think that's misguided.
Yeah. Gosh, you're right. That kind of is. You're right.
And that's just me seeing.
Factor kind of is as well.
Yeah, they're trying to be a record label, which is like funding marketing and
they're
looking
proud
at
of
metrics
the releases
and funding the artists that do better because they're getting better metrics.
Yes, and I believe that is what the Radio Star Maker essentially, and Radio Star Maker was never supposed to last very long. And really funny enough, they used to give in their annual report a breakdown of how much money each artist received in the year, like the actual number, and they don't do that now.
They withhold that.
But Musique Nova Scotia did do that for their last annual report. That was something that I asked for them to do for many years because it's public money. But also I feel like it helps us to better understand the music scene we're in, and it kind of explains things. Like when you see, the Sheepdogs got $250,000 for their last record cycle. Okay.
Right.
I mean, that's not a real number, but
it could be close.
Yeah. And so you think, okay, that it makes sense then. And I think it helps artists to see that's how they're in a different place. And some of that has to do with the money that's being invested in the projects they're working on. It's not because I totally suck. But I've had the conversations with industry people where there's an artist who's done maybe an EP and then they go up on a stage and they perform and the industry people say, their songs just aren't there yet. Right. Like that is one of the biggest things I think that holds artists back in the beginning, but you've got to put them out there to do things.
Totally.
But the music, you want to be good. So I think you're right in saying maybe we need more investment in the making of the music so that it's very good. Because we're expecting everyone to just go home and record at home. Your computer has music GarageBand.
Right.
So, why do you want money to record? It's like, no, it's a totally different experience.
And that's what I feel. And I'm going to be advocating for this, and I have been, but now more than ever over the last few years. And I've talked to Andy at ECMA about this, and no one's ever advocating for recorded music. It's always like, you got to play live. You got to have a good live show. It's like, you got to have a good record. YouTube is the most frequented site for music.
Yeah, it's the biggest streaming site.
More than Spotify, Apple, and I think it's almost more than Apple and Google combined. Wow. So people go to YouTube, and it's videos, but they go there to listen to music. Mm-hmm. And visuals are super important. And videos are almost more important than ever. So things are being flipped. The script is being flipped a little bit differently. And in my opinion, a label and a manager and an agent are more important than ever. It's funny. We thought like the internet would empower us, but no, now you need people who can help you navigate the noise. But I find no one advocates for recorded music. And in this part of the country, they kind of assume that you're just going to go off and do that. But the standards are so high now for recorded music that when you do something scrappy, unless it's just meant for the indie DIY community, like a lot of punk rock works that way very well. But like if it's not that, you need to have your music recorded at the highest level of fidelity and process to get the best ideas forward, like pre-production, songwriting, co-writing. And we don't fund that, and we don't value it. Now, is that because we listen to music for free most of the times, or for $9.99 a month to every song? Is that part of that? Maybe. But we don't value that recorded music. We just assume someone can go off with their laptop and make a great record, and sometimes they can. Mm-hmm. So there's that too, like Andy Schaafs of the world. They go off and make a record on their own. It sounds amazing. But most people don't.
Yeah, it's a lot to expect.
And we don't advocate for that. We don't say, hey, we need to have more support for recorded music. We just don't have it. We just have the juried sound recording from Factor and a little bit of artist development money from Nova Scotia and from Factor. We do not fund recordings in Nova Scotia.
That's so interesting, yeah. And there are a lot of artists. Well, and I mean, it still takes time for them to record their own music. There's a local artist, Renee Smith, who writes all her own music, and she sings, and she plays all the instruments, and she's now also producing all the songs that she's putting out. So, it's all well and good to say like, oh, we'll put some marketing money towards that. But how is... she's got to get to that point where she has a finished product to market, and there's like not very much support leading up to that point.
There is no support, and why don't we pay for her record to be mixed by someone in LA? Because she could produce it, and her point of view is preserved. Then just get someone to polish that. I'm not saying Rainy's music isn't polished. I think it sounds great. But you know what I mean? Like, why are we not doing that? And it doesn't need to be some guy in a studio in Halifax. Like, I'm one of those people. Like, you don't need it could be other ways of doing this. Like, empowering. Could we not empower points of view that are not producers yet? Like, could we not empower more females to be in the studio with money?
Yeah,
absolutely.
That would
we don't
be actually
do that,
incredible.
But I just find it to be we're in such a kind of a dead, boring state with how we treat recorded music in this province. I'll speak for, because other provinces do fund records. PEI does, New Brunswick does.
Oh,
we don't, and I think that is not looking forward properly. We're still trying to compete against medium and major labels, and that seems insane. Like if you give In-Flight Safety $7,500 4 times a year, because we're an independent band with no label, we're our own label, we're going to do something with that, but we cannot maintain the tours in Europe, the promoting of the record, the Billboard and Young and Dundas. We can't maintain that level. It will never be able to compete. So, and with the middle class being kind of decimated by this new society that we live in today, you can have house concerts or you can be playing 600 people at the Marquee. There's no middle class. People don't making 200-person shows at the Seahorse over and over are not a thing. Like it's, either you're starting out or you get to that point where you have to play bigger shows. So it's a weird time to not be funding. More than ever, we need people to fund recorded music, and then try for sync. Then there's money to be made in recorded music. Get it published. Get it on the radio.
And it needs to be very good, I would assume, to have those opportunities as well, right? You can't expect someone to put a scrappy song, a demo recording in their movie or something, which is interesting because I know Musique Nova Scotia and ECMA are always so hot and heavy on the sync and royalty and the publishing and stuff at their conferences, right? There's most often always a delegation of music supervisors or people from that world who come and speak and things. So, it kind of is, we are kind of, I think, uncovering this bit of a conundrum that we're in.
Yeah, and it's my own point of view is specific based on what I value. I've always valued recorded music probably higher than anything. And that started in 1996 when I started working on a 4-track,
Right.
And I've always felt like even in my band, I had to learn how to play live. Someone was like, hey, you guys have some good songs. You have to play some shows. And we're like, okay. And then we played some shows. We're like, you probably should do more on stage than that. You're like, okay. And I developed a little bit of a flair for trying to play live. And it was never anyone who's seen our shows. It's nothing crazy. It's just something that needed to be done to support the records. And so the script has flipped in that when I was starting out, live shows were like calling cards for your record.
Yes.
And now live shows or records are called in YouTube. Your single on YouTube, your single on SoundCloud is a calling card for your live show. So that's a whole other sea change that I'm not going to try to fight. But I do think recorded music still has the essential role in making someone great or not, because everyone listens to music.
Yeah.
Not everyone goes to a live show, but everyone will listen to a record. Because not everyone can go to a live show. You can only get 1,000 people in that club. So
and some people don't like it because of their lifestyle. They don't like it, or it's difficult for them to go out. You're right, but
recorded music is everywhere. It's all over the world, all over the planet. So
thank the Lord. This is great. Thank you so much, John, for coming in and talking to us about this. Your experiences. It's really great to hear from you. So thank you for being here.
Well, thanks for having me. Technically, I didn't really go anywhere, but I'm very happy to be talking to you guys.
Yeah.
I didn't have to go very far. I did move my chair 6 inches to the left, just so the listeners know.
Well, that helped. I mean, thank you for doing that.
Thanks for lifting that big weight.
Thanks for being here.
And thanks to everyone for listening.
Yeah. We appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the show. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast wherever you like to listen to podcasts so you never miss a new episode of Granted. Produced by Krista Keough and John Mullane at John's Studio in Halifax, Nova Scotia.